In the spring of 1943, deep in Nazi-occupied Poland, three British officers were planning something extraordinary. Not just an escape, but a deception so audacious, so impossibly bold, that it would later inspire books, films, and become legend. This is the story of the wooden horse escape from Stalag Luft III, a story of ingenuity, endurance, and three men who turned a piece of gymnasium equipment into a Trojan horse that would fool the German guards for months. You're watching The Long Winter, and today we're going behind the wire. Stalag Luft III. The name alone sent chills through Allied airmen shot down over occupied Europe. Located near Sagan, Poland, about 100 miles southeast of Berlin, it was designed as an escape-proof facility, and the Germans had good reason to be confident. The camp sat on sandy soil. This wasn't by accident. Sand collapses easily, making tunnel construction nearly impossible. Every shovelful removed had to be carefully supported, or the entire structure would cave in. But there was another problem with sand. It was bright yellow, stark yellow, the kind of yellow that stands out like a beacon against the gray dirt on the surface. Try to hide that anywhere in the compound, and the guards would spot it immediately. The camp was built 30 feet back from the warning wire, a thin trip line that marked the kill zone. Cross that wire, and the guards in the towers had orders to shoot without warning. Beyond the wire stood two parallel fences, 9 feet high, topped with barbed wire. Between these fences, more coiled wire, tangled and thick. But the Germans didn't stop there. Seismograph microphones were buried around the perimeter, sensitive enough to detect the sound of digging. Guard patrols with dogs walked the perimeter day and night. Searchlights swept the compound after dark, and every few weeks the guards would conduct random inspections, tearing apart barracks, ripping up floorboards, searching for contraband. The prisoners called it the cooler when they were caught. Solitary confinement in a cell barely large enough to stand. 2 weeks for your first offense, longer for repeat offenders. Into this fortress came Flight Lieutenant Eric Williams. Shot down in December 1942, Williams arrived at Stalag Luft III with one thought consuming his mind: escape. He wasn't alone. The camp held hundreds of Allied airmen, primarily British and Commonwealth pilots, navigators, and bombardiers. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were officers, educated men, many from middle-class or upper-class backgrounds. They'd been trained to think strategically, to solve problems under pressure. And they had time, endless time. The Geneva Convention ensured they didn't have to work. They received Red Cross parcels, food, cigarettes, books. The Germans, following the convention to the letter for Allied prisoners, provided basic necessities. So the prisoners did what prisoners do when they're not fighting for survival. They plotted. Escape committees formed. Men with engineering backgrounds designed tools. Forgers worked on identity papers. Tailors converted uniforms into civilian clothes. Others gathered intelligence. Train schedules, guard rotations, gaps in the wire patrols. But every escape attempt faced the same fundamental problem: distance. The nearest border was over 100 miles away. The Baltic coast, where you might steal a boat to Sweden, was even farther. You needed papers, money, civilian clothes, a compass, maps, and food. And first, you had to get out of the camp. Most tunnels were discovered before completion. The Germans had experience now. They knew what to look for. They'd probe the ground with steel rods, searching for hollow spaces. They'd watch for dirt disposal. They'd note which prisoners spent time in certain barracks. By 1943, the odds of a successful tunnel escape from Stalag Luft III seemed impossibly low. Flight Lieutenant Eric Williams studied these failures, and he realized something crucial. Every tunnel started from inside a building: a barracks, a latrine, a storage shed. Buildings close to the wire were obvious targets, so they received extra scrutiny. Buildings farther back meant longer tunnels, which meant more time, more dirt, more chances to be discovered. What if you could start a tunnel in the middle of the compound, right out in the open, where the Germans would never think to look? The idea seemed insane, but Williams kept thinking about it, and slowly, impossibly, a plan began to form. Williams proposed his idea to two fellow prisoners, Lieutenant Michael Codner and Flight Lieutenant Oliver Philpot. Both men had attempted escapes before. Both had done time in the cooler. Both were desperate enough to consider something radical. The plan centered on a vaulting horse. Gymnastics equipment wasn't unusual in POW camps. The Geneva Convention mandated recreational facilities, and the Germans complied. Prisoners exercised, played sports, stayed fit. A vaulting horse, basically a large wooden box that men would jump over, would draw no suspicion. But Williams's vaulting horse would be special. It would be hollow. Here's how it would work. Every day, prisoners would carry the vaulting horse out to the same spot in the compound for exercise. The horse would be heavy. It would need to be to avoid suspicion. Inside the hollow frame, a man would hide, along with digging tools. When the horse was set down, the man inside would lift a concealed trapdoor in the bottom, break through the surface, and dig straight down. He'd work for 2 or 3 hours while other prisoners vaulted over the horse, exercised around it, creating noise and distraction. Before the exercise session ended, the digger would climb out, replace the dirt, cover the entrance, and hide back inside the horse. The prisoners would carry the horse and the hidden man back to the barracks. The next day, they'd do it again. And again. And again. If it worked, they could start a tunnel right under the Germans' noses, in the middle of the compound, where no one would think to look. The problems were staggering. First, building the horse. It had to look authentic, sturdy enough for actual gymnastics, but hollow with a concealed compartment large enough for a man and tools. And it couldn't look suspicious when carried. The weight distribution had to feel natural. Second, the dirt. They'd be digging in bright yellow sand. Hundreds of pounds of it. It couldn't be dispersed on the surface. Too obvious. It would have to come back inside the horse, trip after trip, and be hidden somewhere in the barracks. Third, the tunnel itself. Starting 30 feet from the wire meant they'd need to dig at least 100 feet to clear the outer fence and emerge in the tree line beyond, in collapsing sand, without proper timber for supports, without adequate tools. Fourth, security. Every prisoner exercising around the horse would need to be in on the plan, or at least reliable enough not to ask questions. One informant, one careless word, and the entire operation would collapse. And fifth, endurance. This wouldn't take days or weeks. It would take months. Months of grueling physical labor, of anxiety, of carrying a man in a box back and forth, of hiding dirt, of praying the guards didn't notice. Most prisoners thought Williams was mad. The escape committee, the senior prisoners who coordinated all escape attempts, were skeptical. But Williams was persuasive. He'd thought through the details. He had answers for the obvious problems. And most importantly, no one had tried this before. The committee gave conditional approval. Williams, Codner, and Philpot could proceed, but with limited resources. No official support from the camp's forgery section, no guaranteed papers or civilian clothes. If they wanted to do this, they'd do it on their own. Fine, Williams said. We'll do it ourselves. Construction began, using wood scrounged from Red Cross crates, bed slats, and other scavenged materials. They built the horse. It measured about 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, 3 feet high. Large enough for a man to crouch inside, curled in a fetal position. They added handles on the sides for carrying, reinforced the top for jumping, made it look as legitimate as possible. The trapdoor in the bottom was clever, designed to be invisible when closed, held in place by friction rather than hinges or locks that might rattle. They tested it. Could a man fit inside? Yes, barely. Could 4 prisoners carry it convincingly? Yes, if they practiced. Did it look authentic? From a distance, absolutely. Now came the hard part, convincing the Germans to let them use it. Williams approached the German guards with his request. British prisoners, he explained, wanted to maintain fitness. They'd built a vaulting horse for gymnastics. Could they use a section of the compound for daily exercise? The guards discussed it, consulted with the camp commandant, inspected the horse carefully. It was solid wood, heavy, no hidden compartments they could detect, and exercise was permitted under the Geneva Convention. The request was reasonable. Permission granted. On a morning in July 1943, 6 prisoners carried the vaulting horse out to a spot Williams had carefully selected. 30 feet from the warning wire, positioned to give maximum cover from the guard towers. They set it down and the gymnastics began. Men jumped over the horse. Others performed exercises nearby, calisthenics, jogging in place, anything to create activity and noise. From the guard towers, it looked perfectly innocent, just prisoners staying fit. Inside the horse, Eric Williams crouched in absolute darkness, tools in hand, waiting. When the signal came, a specific pattern of footsteps, Williams carefully lifted the trapdoor. Beneath him was dirt and grass. He began to dig. The first day, he only went down 2 feet before time ran out. The sand was difficult to work with, collapsing constantly. He scooped it into bags made from trouser legs, anything cloth they could find. When the exercise session ended, Williams loaded the bags of sand into the hollow horse with him, replaced the dirt plug over the entrance, closed the trap door, and waited. The prisoners lifted the horse, now considerably heavier, and carried it back. Williams climbed out in the barracks. The dirt was quickly dispersed under floorboards into a small cavity they'd prepared. Day 1. Success. But it was backbreaking work. Crouching in a box for 3 hours, digging in collapsing sand, breathing stale air, every muscle cramping. Williams could barely walk after that first session. They rotated diggers. Williams, Codner, and Philpot took turns. 1 man per session. Some days Williams dug, other days Codner, then Philpot. This served 2 purposes. It distributed the physical toll, and it meant if 1 man was caught, the others might escape suspicion. The tunnel progressed slowly, agonizingly slowly. Down they went, foot by foot, until they reached about 4 feet deep, deep enough that the tunnel wouldn't be detected by surface probes. Then they started horizontal, aiming for the tree line beyond the outer fence. Supporting the tunnel was a constant nightmare. They scrounged bedboards, broke them into segments, wedged them into the sandy walls. It wasn't enough. Sections would collapse, sometimes burying the digger in sand. They'd have to dig him out, reinforce the tunnel, and continue. Air was another problem. At 4 feet down, extending horizontally, the air became stale quickly. They fashioned a crude ventilation system using a kit bag attached to a rope. Someone on the surface would pull the bag up and down like a bellows, forcing fresh air into the tunnel. It helped, but not much. And the dirt. God, the dirt. Hundreds of pounds of bright yellow sand, coming back trip after trip. They dispersed it everywhere, under barracks, in ceiling cavities, mixed into the gray surface soil in small amounts during exercise sessions. They filled palliasses, mattresses with sand, slept on them. Every available hiding space was used. The guards watched the vaulting horse sessions, but saw nothing suspicious. Just prisoners exercising. The same routine, day after day. Boring, predictable, which was exactly the point. Predictability breeds complacency. The guards stopped paying close attention. It became part of the daily routine. Those British officers and their gymnastics. Nothing worth scrutinizing. But the prisoners watching the guards were anything but complacent. A network of lookouts tracked every guard's movement. If a patrol deviated from routine, if a guard showed too much interest in the vaulting horse area, a signal would be passed. The digger would stop, cover the entrance, wait. There were close calls. Once, a guard walked directly past the horse while Williams was inside, mid-dig. The guard's boots were inches from the trapdoor. Williams froze, holding his breath. Tool silent. The guard paused. Williams could hear him breathing. Then the guard moved on. Another time, a German officer decided to inspect the horse between sessions. The prisoners had to quickly carry it back, with no digger inside, and set it down for inspection. The officer examined it, jumped on it himself to test its sturdiness, then waved them away. Crisis averted. By September, they'd been digging for 3 months. The tunnel had extended roughly 80 feet. They were under the warning wire now, approaching the fence line. But the sand was becoming more unstable the farther they went. Collapses were more frequent. The air was worse, and winter was coming. The ground would freeze, making digging nearly impossible. They had to finish soon. Williams, Codner, and Philpot met in secret. They calculated the distance, estimated they needed another 20 feet, maybe 25, to safely emerge beyond the outer fence in the tree line. Another month of digging. Could they last that long? Could their luck hold? Could they keep hiding the sand? Keep the tunnel from collapsing? Keep the guards from noticing? They had no choice. They'd come too far to quit now. The tunnel was complete, 100 feet long, 4 feet deep, emerging in the tree line beyond the outer fence. They'd checked the exit point carefully. It was concealed by brush, invisible from the guard towers. Tonight, they would go. Williams, Codner, and Philpot had spent weeks preparing their escape kits. Forged papers, created painstakingly by hand, civilian clothes modified from uniforms and Red Cross clothing, compasses made from smuggled materials, maps memorized and sketched, a bit of German currency acquired through bribes and black market trades. Their cover stories were rehearsed. French workers traveling to different cities for work. Their German was passable, not fluent, but enough to avoid immediate suspicion if questioned briefly. The plan: Williams and Codner would travel together, heading west toward France. Philpot would go north alone, aiming for the Baltic coast and a possible boat to Sweden. They waited until after evening roll call, when the camp settled into its nighttime routine. Then they slipped away to the barracks where the vaulting horse was stored. One last time, they crawled into the tunnel. It was terrifying, crawling through collapsing sand in absolute darkness, knowing that tons of earth could cave in at any moment. The tunnel was barely wide enough to crawl through. Claustrophobic, airless. They reached the exit shaft. Williams went first, carefully digging upward, breaking through the surface. He poked his head out, listening. Silence. He climbed out, helped Codner up. Philpot emerged last. They crouched in the brush, hearts pounding, waiting for an alarm. Nothing. They'd made it out. The three men shook hands, whispered good luck, and split up. Williams and Codner headed west, Philpot north. What followed was a grueling journey that would test every ounce of their endurance. Williams and Codner walked through the night, avoiding roads, navigating by compass. When dawn approached, they hid in forests, sleeping in ditches, under bushes. They traveled by night for days, covering maybe 10 or 15 miles each night. Their forged papers got them past checkpoints twice. They posed as French workers, showed their documents, and were waved through. But food was running out. They were exhausted, filthy, desperate. Near the port city of Stettin, they managed to stow away on a Danish ship. They hid in the cargo hold for days as the ship sailed through the Baltic. When it finally docked in Denmark, they snuck off, contacted the Danish resistance, and were smuggled to neutral Sweden. They were free. Philpot had a different journey. He traveled by train, using his forged papers, posing as a Norwegian worker. His German held up under questioning. He reached the Baltic port of Danzig, made contact with sympathizers, and was smuggled onto a Swedish ship. He, too, made it to freedom. All three men, Williams, Codner, and Philpot, successfully escaped from Stalag Luft III and returned to Britain. The Germans didn't discover the tunnel until days later, during a routine inspection. When they found it, they were stunned. A tunnel starting in the middle of the compound, dug over 3 months without detection? The commandant was furious. Investigations were launched, but the prisoners revealed nothing. The wooden horse was confiscated, examined, finally understood. Too late. The wooden horse escape remains one of the most ingenious operations in POW history. It succeeded not through violence or luck, but through deception, patience, and relentless determination. Eric Williams later wrote a book about the escape, which was adapted into a 1950 film. The story inspired countless other prisoners to keep resisting, keep plotting, keep hoping. Stalag Luft III would later become famous for another tunnel escape, the Great Escape of March 1944, where 76 men broke out through a tunnel called Harry. Tragically, 50 of those men were executed by the Gestapo on Hitler's orders. But the wooden horse escape was different. It succeeded completely. All three men made it home. In the darkest corners of the long winter, when hope seemed impossible, three men turned a piece of gymnasium equipment into a symbol of defiance. They proved that even in a fortress designed to be escape-proof, the human spirit cannot be caged. Thank you for watching The Long Winter. If you'd like to hear more stories of resistance, ingenuity, and survival from behind the wire, subscribe and join us next time. Until then, remember their courage.